Late one night, Ella sat alone in her modest apartment, flipping through her phone to combat the gnawing boredom. Outside, the rain poured relentlessly, and the distant rumble of thunder added to the oppressive silence of the empty rooms around her. She was about to turn on a movie when her TV flickered to life on its own. Startled, she stared at the screen, which displayed nothing but static. Ella reached for the remote, but as her hand brushed it, the static shifted into a distorted broadcast. The picture was grainy, and the sound crackled, but she could just make out the image of a man sitting at a desk in an old-fashioned news studio. He was wearing a tattered suit, his face pale and gaunt, with sunken, lifeless eyes that seemed to look directly at her. "Good evening," he began, his voice hollow and distorted, like it was being broadcast from another world. "We interrupt your solitude with a special report. Your time is running out." Ella's heart raced as she fumbled with the remote, pressing every button in an attempt to turn off the TV, but the screen stayed on. The man continued speaking, his words becoming more bizarre and chilling. "Do you hear it? The knock you've been ignoring? They're here now. They're waiting." A faint knock sounded from her front door. Ella froze, the remote slipping from her hand. The knock came again, louder this time. She crept toward the door, her pulse pounding in her ears. Peering through the peephole, she saw nothing but darkness, even though the hallway light should have been on. "Don't open it," the man on the TV warned, his lifeless eyes now wide and unblinking. "They only need a crack to get in." Suddenly the knocking stopped, replaced by the sound of faint scratching, as though nails were being dragged down the other side of the door. Ella backed away, her breathing shallow. The TV crackled again, and the man's face filled the screen, now closer than before. His lips didn't move, but his voice filled the room. "They're inside." Ella spun around, her eyes scanning every shadow in the dimly lit apartment. The lights flickered, and for a brief moment she saw them, figures standing in the corners of her living room, impossibly tall and completely still. Their faces were obscured, but she could feel their eyes on her. The room grew colder, and the sound of static filled her ears. The TV was now showing a live feed of her apartment, the camera positioned behind her. On the screen, she watched herself turn slowly to face the figures, but when she turned in real life, the room was empty. The figures were gone, the static ceased, and the TV powered off with a pop. The apartment was silent again, save for the rain tapping against the windows. Ella tried to convince herself it was a hallucination, the result of too much caffeine and too little sleep. But as she turned toward her bedroom, she saw it. On her window, written in dripping red letters, was a single word: soon. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up with trembling hands to see a notification, a live stream. It was her own face, staring back at her. Behind her, in the stream, the figures had returned. They were closer this time. Ella's breath hitched as the live stream continued on her phone, her face frozen in terror as the shadowy figures loomed closer behind her. She spun around to face the room again, but it was empty. The air was heavy and cold, carrying a faint, metallic tang that made her stomach churn. Her phone buzzed again, another notification. This time, it wasn't a stream, it was a message. The sender field was blank, and the subject line read, "Turn around." Her body trembled as she hesitated. She couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes boring into her back. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The overhead light flickered again, casting shifting, jagged shadows on the walls. Summoning what little courage she had left, Ella turned slowly. The room was still empty, but now her TV had turned on again. The screen displayed an old, grainy family photograph. She stepped closer to get a better look, and her heart sank. It was her. She was a child in the picture, holding hands with her parents. They were standing in front of a house she didn't recognize, their faces blurry and distorted. Her younger self was staring directly at the camera, her wide eyes filled with fear. The screen flickered, and the photo changed. This time, she was alone in the picture, standing in the same spot. Her parents were gone. Behind her, in the photograph, the tall, shadowy figures had appeared, their long limbs bent unnaturally as they reached toward her. "No," she whispered, stepping back, her voice barely audible over the rising static. The man from the broadcast reappeared, his gaunt face now filling the entire screen. His lips curled into a slow, unnatural smile. You've seen them now. They'll come closer. They always do. The knocking resumed, but this time it was coming from inside the apartment, soft at first, as if testing her resolve. Then it grew louder, more insistent, echoing from every direction. She backed into the corner of the room, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Her hands shook so badly that the device slipped from her grip, landing screen up on the floor. The live stream was still playing, showing the figures moving in unison, closing the distance between them and her. Her phone buzzed one final time. A message flashed across the screen, "Don't look away." But she did. She squeezed her eyes shut, covering her ears as the knocking turned into a deafening pounding. The walls trembled, the lights sputtered, and the air grew colder still. When she finally opened her eyes, the pounding stopped. The apartment was dark now, lit only by the faint glow of her phone. The live stream was still playing, but it showed nothing but static. She dared to take a breath, her body trembling, but relief never came. The man's voice returned, soft but chilling. "They're behind you." Ella turned, tears streaming down her face, only to come face to face with them. The figures loomed over her, their featureless faces inches from hers, their grins stretched impossibly wide as they whispered in unison, "Stay." When the neighbors reported strange noises the next day, the police found Ella's apartment empty. Her phone was still on the floor, streaming static. The words "soon" were scrawled across every mirror in the house. On the TV, the photograph of her as a child was displayed once more, but this time Ella was missing.